The smile of a Prime Minister who secured a deal the three who tried before him could not. Today was about selling the deal to the people it affects most.
I believe, hand on heart, that it provides a basis for all the parties, all the communities here to look at it, to look at the detail, consider it, and they will see that it is a big step forward, that it does address the concerns that people have. And I hope will allow them to come together, put all the division and arguments of the past behind us, come together and move forward together and start to look forward for a brighter future for Northern Ireland.
Rishi Sunak was in County Antrim today facing business leaders whose goods, he said, thanks to his Windsor Framework, have unique access to both the UK and EU single market.
I can tell you, when I go around the world and talk to businesses, they know that. They're like, that's interesting. If you guys get this sorted, then we want to invest in Northern Ireland, because nowhere else does that exist. That's like the world's most exciting economic zone.
Critics were keen to point out that access he was so enthusiastic about was enjoyed by the whole of the UK pre-Brexit. Despite the Prime Minister's sales pitch, though, this Unionist Assembly member says fundamentally Northern Ireland will be treated differently to anywhere else in the UK under this deal.
When you tear away the spin and look at the substance, it's quite a different picture. And the picture that then is revealed is a continuing surrender of sovereignty over Northern Ireland, because we've been retained, the only part of the United Kingdom to be so retained, in a foreign single market for goods, which puts us under foreign laws, overseen by a foreign court, and that is a fundamental affront to our constitutional position.
But this is the Unionist leader who's under pressure to announce what his position is. The Democratic Unionist Party collapsed power sharing because of the last protocol deal. Jeffrey Donaldson is currently canvassing party opinion before responding. But in Dublin, Sinn Féin's leader says the DUP have frozen time in Stormont for long enough.
That the biggest concern for people in the north is that they have government. The biggest concern is that we have an executive and a functioning assembly 9 months after a democratic election. So there is now, Taoiseach, I'm sure you'll agree, no logic for the DUP to continue its blockade. The negotiations are over.
I think he's asked for a little bit of time to consider the agreement, to pore over the text, to ask some questions. I think that is reasonable, and I think we should allow a little bit of time and space for that to happen and for him to consult with his party. I think that is not unreasonable, and certainly the European Union and the British government are happy for that to happen.
To back this deal, though, is no easy task for Jeffrey Donaldson and the DUP, say fellow Unionists who've known him for decades. Are you expecting anyone to turn around anytime soon and say, yep, we can get behind this deal?
No, I'm not. And I think the big thing for Donaldson, he has a lot of people to persuade, because he's got Jim Allister from the TUV, he's got new generation loyalism, he's got old generation loyalism, he's got parts of the Orange Order all telling him that this is not enough, that the Unionist identity is not being protected, that Northern Ireland is not being protected, and they want a whole lot more out of this agreement. That's going to be a hard task, because Rishi Sunak has said that this deal is going to go to Parliament in the next few days. And once that goes through, and it will go through with a massive majority, it means that Donaldson's position is very, very weak.
With a deal signed, attention turns now to the infrastructure needed to implement it. On this site in Larne, next to the port, building work is now expected to start soon. Leaked plans of the proposed border control post to Channel 4 News show the scale of infrastructure needed. The client listed as EU designations of NI portal facilities. One page sets out designs for stabling for checks on animals. Another, labelled product inspection facility, shows the layout for vans and trucks to enter the site. The cost of all this infrastructure is expected to be tens of millions of pounds.
This is a Prime Minister who tells us the Irish sea border is gone, at the very same time as he's pumping tens of millions into supplementing the very infrastructure of that border. You know, the thing does not add up, and I think the Prime Minister diminishes himself in terms of his credibility when he tries to say the Irish sea border is gone, when at the same time he's building it with fury and huge amounts of taxpayers' money to placate who? The EU, who frankly, if they want to protect their single market, and I can understand them wanting to do that, should do it as they would anywhere else on their own territory.
Rishi Sunak's deal is about much more than easing the movement of goods from one section of this nation to another. For 9 months, governing here has ceased. Key decisions remain unmade. There is a path now to reopening these gates. Walking it, though, may take courage and compromise.
Look, the truth of the matter is Rishi Sunak doesn't need the DUP to get his deal through Parliament. But to get Stormont up and running, that is in the DUP's hands. And they don't have an opinion right now, or they don't have a position on Rishi Sunak's deal. There's been a conspicuous absence of DUP voices on TV and radio, and that's because they are hunkering down. Jeffrey Donaldson is canvassing opinion. One insider saying to me today, look, if he's going to back this deal, he needs 60 to 70% of members behind him. Some members actually saying to me that, look, actually, when they were going through the details of the deal, they're actually very impressed with what Rishi Sunak has managed to achieve here. Fundamentally, yes, Northern Ireland will be being treated differently to other parts of the UK. On principle, that is a bitter pill for them to swallow. But Rishi Sunak has achieved enough that they could get behind this deal and say, yes, we support it. However, they're in no rush to do it. A couple of people making the point to me today, it might be in the DUP's best interest to tread water for a little while, be a little bit constructively ambiguous with what they think until after the upcoming elections. The only problem for Rishi Sunak, they're not until May.
Paul McNamara wrapped up in Belfast there for us. Thanks very much indeed. So what's going on in Westminster? Well, let's find out from Gary Gibbon, our political editor. Gary.
To tell you the truth, one of the things that's going on here is everybody's wondering about that question Paul was just touching on. When Rishi Sunak says he wants to give the DUP time and space to think about all of this, people are scratching their heads wondering, well, how much? I was just speaking to one DUP figure who said he was pretty sure that the party would be marshalling its questions into next week and trying to get them addressed then, but that wouldn't necessarily be the end of the matter. This particular figure said if the senior figures in the DUP were happy with what they were looking at and the answers they'd got back, or if not happy, then content, that's probably as good as it would get, then he thought that the party generally would allow the DUP to go back in to Stormont. But he then promptly said, but I'm not utterly convinced that that Stormont break isn't a break where the brake cable has already been snapped. None of this is yet putting a cloud over Rishi Sunak's great day. I mean, really the best day of his premiership, it has to be said. He's been in the 22 committee of Tory backbenchers just now. And when a Tory leader goes in to talk about Europe to their backbenchers, we normally have to give you a sort of warning about how descriptions of violent scenes are about to follow. Not today. Rishi Sunak was greeted very warmly, and he went on to tell them that he thought that the public were sick of the Brexit drama, and he even dared to boast about his achievement in negotiating this protocol, saying, if I'd promised you I'd get what I have come home with a few months ago, you'd think I'd been at more than Coca-Cola. Outside that meeting as well, the old ERG leader, Steve Baker, now a cheerleader for Tory leaders, when so often in the past he's been a thorn in the side. Jeffrey Donaldson, right now, the DUP leader, is in with the ERG itself. There could still be some people in there who vote against this agreement, but it doesn't look as though they're in great numbers, and it doesn't look like he's trying right now to lead them over the top in some sort of offensive, because he is, as Paul was saying there, chewing over everything and trying to work out the detail of what's in front of him. A little earlier, I caught up with Sir Jeffrey Donaldson, and I started by asking him about those words Rishi Sunak had been using in Northern Ireland earlier today, where he'd talked about Northern Ireland being in this sort of wonderful, unique place inside a Brexit UK, and yet inside the single market, something Rishi Sunak, of course, himself suggested wasn't a good deal, but he was saying was great and made Northern Ireland a rather unique place.
Well, of course, Northern Ireland is a place that I call home. It is a unique place for me, and I want to see Northern Ireland prospering. The problem for us is that the protocol has held back our economy now for several years.
It could be best of both worlds, as Rishi Sunak was saying, perhaps surprising for a hard Brexiteer.
Well, that's why I want to study the detail of this framework. I want to be sure.
But it's got potential.
Well, let's explore that and examine that.
Have you got some flashing red lights, though, as you look at it? You've read through it. probably several times already.
Well, we have identified some areas of concern and we will engage with the government on that. But we also recognise that in other areas progress has been made, and we will judge all of these things in the round and we'll come to a reasoned decision, but we will be engaging with the government. I've come a long way and my party has come a long way with this issue. We've taken a stand. The EU would not have been back at the table. We would not have got that framework agreement yesterday if it hadn't been for the stand the DUP has taken.
Doesn't sound like the EU is coming back to the table, though, after this. This is the last and final offer, isn't it?
Well, look, how many times have we heard before that nothing would happen? And it has happened. And we welcome that. And we will continue to push for those areas where we feel further clarification is required.
But clarification is different from getting a renegotiation. You accept this is the final deal. You've just got to examine it.
Well, and if that's the case,
if that's
the case, we need to come to a decision on that. But I will seek to ensure there is clarity around what it is we're being asked to agree to.
You've been into votes before on Europe and looked around you for the Tory armada that was going to sail in beside you. Once again, it doesn't look like it's there, does it?
Well, we stand on our own 2 feet on these things. That's what we've been doing for the last number of years. And as a result of our actions, the EU were brought back to the table. They have renegotiated, and we have an outcome that we want to look at, examine, consider, and come to a decision on.
Some people have been listening to the phraseology you've been using, and they've just wondered whether there's a choreography to all of this, that deep in your heart you've decided you do want to go back in to Stormont, into power sharing.
I'm not a dancer, I'm a warrior, and I'm going to fight for the best deal for Northern Ireland.
Well, Jeffrey Donaldson there speaking to Gary Gibbon at Westminster. Well, earlier I spoke to the Sinn Fein MP John Finucane, whose father was killed by loyalist paramilitaries in the 1980s. I asked him if he was surprised that the DUP had not yet signed on the dotted line.
Well, I think I would start my answer off by saying that it is responsible, I think, for all political parties, relevant businesses and sectors here to go over the detail. What I do not accept, and what we haven't accepted for over a year, is that the people here in this society have been punished by the fact that the DUP have walked away from our Assembly and Executive. Indeed, last May we had an election where over 70% of the voters voted for MLAs and parties who would put no preconditions on going back into the Executive. So whilst people may responsibly take time to look over the detail, there is no excuse at all for anybody continuing a boycott of our Assembly and Executive.
You know more than most people what's at stake here, because you've experienced the painful history of Northern Ireland at first hand. Does that give you a particular understanding of what's at stake here?
Well, I think that we are all very much committed to the peace process. The people here want to see the fruition of that. They want to see the particular strand of the Good Friday Agreement, which brought peace to this island, respected, and they want to see their democratic vote exercised last May respected. That's why we need the institutions up and running. It's why we need an Assembly. It's why we need an Executive. But we also have a very unique economic potential now. We have the ability to create jobs, to boost our economy. And I think it's very clear, and we've seen that over the past week, it's very clear that there is no support for anybody who wants to bring us back to the dark days of the past. You've cited my own particular experience. My experience was shared by too many other people. So it is incumbent upon all leaders in political parties, I think, to recognise what the vast majority of people here want, and that stable government that delivers for workers and delivers for families.
When he spoke to our political editor, Gary Gibbon, Jeffrey Donaldson, the head of the DUP, told him, "I'm not a dancer, I'm a warrior," when it came to the fact that he might inevitably waltz back into Stormont. What do you say to that?
I'm not quite sure exactly what that analogy or metaphor quite means. The people here want to see action. They want to see those who they voted for last year in the positions that they were voted to go in and take their role in. We need a health minister there taking decisions for the health service. Nobody here has any trust or faith in Tory ministers making decisions on local issues. So we need agreed budgets, we need an Assembly and an Executive up and running, and that should not be tied, it should never have been tied to what essentially was a negotiation between the UK Government and European Commission, and the negotiations are now over. It's been made very clear that there will be no further renegotiation. The deal is the deal as was presented. There is nothing further to influence, therefore there is no reason at all why they continue their boycott.
Just finally and briefly, I mean, some of their supporters would say this is all existential for them. What can you say to them to bring them on board?
Well, I think with respect, it is not for me to bring them on board. The vast majority of people who cast their vote last year are the same people who rejected Brexit, are the same people who understand that the protocol was necessary to protect us from the worst impacts of Brexit. The DUP are not representative of society here. What is representative is that body of the electorate here, over 70%, that, as I say, did not want Brexit in the first place, that recognised the economic potential of the protocol. So what I would say is that the issues that I get spoken to about on a daily basis are not necessarily about issues like the ECJ or other existential or slightly manufactured issues around the protocol, but it's about our health service, it's about cost of living, it's about creating jobs and making a better life for future generations, and that is where the DUP need to play their part.